US 27 in Main Street, Havana, Florida. Here are case study limits shown in the diagram. If we look at this as an aerial photograph, here's an aerial from Google Earth. You can see it's blown up here. We have the several roads coming together and to form what looks like the grid of a small town in this condition. So let's take a look at it, see what we're working with here. Our land use map, yes, does show us that we have a lot of retail along this corridor, so that's making us think it's more of a town type of condition. Going back and looking at the aerial photograph, we can see that it is surrounded by a large rural area. So this is looking like we may be looking at a rural town in this condition. Let's look a little closer. So we'll look at our primary measures for building height and the placement of the buildings. Our building height is 1 to 2 floors. The building placement is mostly attached buildings. As you can see in the upper and lower photographs, there are no setbacks. These buildings are located directly on the back of the sidewalk. We do have fronting uses. You enter these buildings directly from the sidewalk without going through a parking lot. Where is the parking itself located? US 27 is the state road that we would be concerned with. It's right in the middle of the photograph here, running up and down, and you can see the parking is essentially located behind the buildings. In some cases, it's located to the side of the buildings. What about roadway connectivity? The intersection density here is 325 intersections per square mile. The block perimeter is 1,520 feet, and the block length is 330 feet on average. So when we put all that into the matrix, what we're seeing here is that the building placement, fronting uses, location of parking, connectivity measurements, all those are indicating a fairly urban condition, and those actually could kick us all the way up into C5 and C6. And so how do we know that Havana, Florida is not actually a C4 or C5 or C6 condition? Well, it's not an area of a million population, so it's certainly not going to be C6. What's going to tell us this is going back and looking at those distinguishing characteristics. A C2T rural town is a small concentration of developed area immediately surrounded by rural and natural areas. That's what we're looking at with Havana. So we're not C4, we're not C5. What we're falling into here is a C2T condition using these primary measures. If we wanted to use the secondary measures to look a little more closely here, then we could, just to kind of show you what that would look like. Our residential density is 27 dwelling units to the acre. Office and retail density has a 1.2 floor area ratio. Existing population is 0.3 persons per acre. And the employment density is 4 jobs per acre. So this is getting us, again, we're seeing some of the same overlap between C2T, C4, C5, and C6. But the preponderance of the evidence, again, going back to the distinguishing characteristics, if nothing else, is pointing us back toward a C2T rural town. SR 70, Lakewood Ranch. Looking at the aerial photograph, we can see that this is a stretch of roadway that is surrounded on either side by semi-connected roadway network. It looks like I see cul-de-sacs in there. I'm not sure how well that's connected, so I'm thinking, just looking at it from a distinguishing characteristics perspective, it's not a compact urban area surrounded by large residential lands. It doesn't appear to be in the middle of the city, although I'm not quite sure what's going on around it. It might. So, you know, I may be looking at a C3 or C4 condition here. We're not sure, so we can look a little more closely and see what it is we think we're working with here. When I look at the land uses, however, they tell an interesting picture. This particular section of roadway essentially is a monoculture. If you look at the selection of land uses along here, it's essentially all single-family residential. There's just a little bit of commercial and a little bit of institutional and government on the ends of it. But for the piece of roadway that we're concerned with here, we're essentially looking at single-family residential. So that's making me think less mixing of uses tends to make me think more suburban and rural as opposed to more mixing of uses would make me think more urban. So let's proceed and see what we're working with here. Let's look at our building height, placement, and parking. Building height is 1 to 2 floors. Well, most things are 1 to 2 floors, so that's interesting, but not diagnostic. We also have the building placement. We have detached buildings here with medium to large setbacks on all sides. You can see from the aerial photograph and also the view from the street itself. You can't even see the residential land uses or any land uses from the street. All you see are trees. So that's kind of a clue that we're looking at a place here that is really pulled back from the street and is not relating to the street at all for our roadway. So there are no fronting uses here. And the parking is all located in the front of the buildings. If you see in the upper photograph here, there is driveways that lead to the front of these houses here. So these are the kinds of houses that have the driveway and the garage on the front of the house, so you drive right into it. So all the parking is in the front here. What does our roadway connectivity look like in this condition? We have 40 intersections per square mile. Our block perimeter is 6,040 feet on average. It's a very large block size. Our block length is 1,140 feet. It's very long blocks. When we load all that into the matrix and look at what we're coming up with for our primary measures, this is steering me towards some kind of a C3 condition and looking at the distinguishing characteristics, mostly residential uses within large blocks and a disconnected or sparse roadway network. Yes, that's starting to look a lot like my C3 suburban residential. We could also look at secondary measures for this. The allowed residential density is 1 dwelling unit to the acre. That looks like C3R. The allowed office residential, the office and retail density is 0.23 floor area ratio. That could be C3 commercial. Our existing population density is very low. It's 0.4 persons per acre. That actually gets us down into the rural category. There's 0 jobs per acre in this condition. Based on the distinguishing characteristics and looking at these secondary measures, this allowed residential density is really what we have to go on, and it's telling us that this is a C3R suburban residential condition. For this example, we have US 27, Haines City. Looking at the aerial photograph, we can see that we have looks like rural lands and some suburban around the perimeter. This is the intersection of highways here, and we're looking at the area along US 27 for this study. Primary land uses through here are retail and commercial. And if you look at for residential, you're not going to find a whole lot. There's some multifamily to the rear and then some single family further back. So this is a fairly classic suburban type of development pattern. So that's kind of steering us in that direction right away. Let's look at our building height and placement for primary measures. 1 to 2 floors. Building placement, these are detached buildings with large setbacks. You can see these large parking lots. In fact, they're so large they even have out parcels up closer to the street here along these with these large shopping centers. There are really no fronting uses along this highway. So when we look at where the parking is located, we can see the parking is located between the building and the street in large parking lots, mostly in the front. There is some on the sides. Let's look at our roadway connectivity through here. We have intersection density of 43 intersections per square mile, a block perimeter of 4,560 feet, fairly large blocks. Block lengths are 1,420 feet on average. Dropping that into the matrix and looking at the distinguishing characteristics, we start looking pretty quickly here at a C3C suburban commercial, mostly non-residential uses with large building footprints and large parking lots within large blocks and a disconnected or sparse roadway network. that certainly sounds like the area that we were just looking at here, so we could probably code this as a C3 suburban commercial condition. We could also use secondary measures if necessary to go a little further with this analysis. There's no residential density according to the zoning maps that we were looking at there. The allowed retail and office density is 0.35 floor area ratio. Existing population density of 1.8 persons per acre. That actually looks rural, but we didn't see any of that being played out on the ground, but that was possible. The employment density is high enough to get us into C2T rural town. But again, looking at the distinguishing characteristics, we saw that this was not a concentrated urban area surrounded by a lot of rural land, so it's not a rural town. The distinguishing characteristics and the secondary characteristics left over then tend to point us toward a C3C suburban commercial condition.